The bride lied her name. She was the sheriff's missing sister from Kansas. The contract paper was on my kitchen table for 3 days before I signed it. I kept going back to it, after supper. Before I lit the lamp in the morning, there was a crease across the middle of it where the mail writer had folded it wrong, and I'd look at that crease and think, Cal Briggs, you are 47 years old and you are about to send for a woman you have never seen. But the house was too quiet. The house had been too quiet for 6 years. So I signed it. The arrangement was through a woman in Abilene who ran a boarding situation for ladies needing placement. Practical arrangement was how they put it in the advertisement, which suited me because I didn't need sentiment. I needed somebody who could pull her half of the work and didn't mind a ranching life on the Nebraska plains, which is not a gentle life. What I got was a woman on the Dodge City stage who told me her name was Margaret Holt. She was not what I'd pictured. She was compact, quick in the eyes, the kind of still that isn't peace but is something closer to readiness. She had one trunk and a flour sack, and she shook my hand when I introduced myself and said she was pleased, and that was all. Didn't lean on me, didn't fill the air with talk. We drove the 11 miles to the ranch, and she asked 3 questions. What was the water situation? What did I run, cattle or horses or both? Whether the nearest town had a doctor. I told her, a creek and a hand-dug well, both good. Cattle, 140 head in a good year. The nearest doctor was 18 miles, but I hadn't needed him in 4 years and didn't intend to. She nodded once at each answer, the way a man checks items off a ledger. I told her we'd go to the Justice of the Peace in Harnett on Saturday. She said that suited her. She didn't seem like a woman named Margaret Holt. But I let that go. Men on the plains generally don't press into things that aren't their business yet, and she wasn't my business yet. She was a stranger who might become my wife, and I was going to handle that the same way I'd handle a horse I hadn't worked before. Slow, quiet, no sudden moves. She slept in the loft room that first week. I didn't suggest otherwise. She came down before light every morning and had coffee made before I got my boots on, which was something my mother had always done, and which I had not noticed until it wasn't there anymore, and then noticed every single morning for 6 years. That small thing landed on me differently than I expected. Saturday came, we drove to Harnett. I should tell you what Harnett was in those years. Not a big place. A post office, a dry goods, a stable, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, and the office of the Justice of the Peace, which was also the sheriff's office because Will Purdy was both and wasn't going to staff 2 buildings. Will Purdy was a heavy man, flat-faced, 20 years in that county, and he looked at the woman beside me for a long moment before he looked at me. "Bringing a bride, Cal," he said. "That's the idea," I said. He looked at her again. Something crossed his face I couldn't read. He pulled the ledger out for the marriage entry and said, "Name." She said, "Margaret Holt." He wrote it down. He performed the ceremony. His wife Dora witnessed it. And then as we were signing the ledger, Will Purdy said, without looking up, "Miss, you wouldn't have kin in Salina, would you?" She went still, not the ready still from before, something different, something guarded. "No," she said, "I'm from Missouri." We drove back in quiet that stretched differently than the quiet on the way in. The marriage worked. I want to be plain about that before anything else. Whatever her name was, whatever she was carrying, the woman was capable, and she was honest in the ways that mattered on a ranch. She could read a cow for sickness 2 days before any symptom I'd have caught. She kept the accounts, which I had been doing badly, and found I had been overpaying the Dobson outfit for contracted fencing by 11% for 3 years. She told me once and moved on without making a thing of it, which is the right way to tell a man an uncomfortable truth. Work it was a relief to know, don't use it. She did not talk about herself, but she didn't hide herself either, if you follow me. A hiding person goes hollow in the eyes and builds a shell around themselves, and you feel the shell. She was present. She laughed sometimes when something caught her sideways, and she had a low, private laugh that she didn't put on for the room. Those were just for whoever happened to be there. There was one night in February when the temperature dropped so hard the water in the bucket by the door froze by midnight, and I went out every hour to break the ice in the trough. She came out with me on the second trip, no asking, pulled on her coat and took the mallet when I came back in for the lantern. We worked together in that cold until near 4 in the morning without speaking because there wasn't anything to say. Every cow we lost would cost us. We didn't lose any. We went in and she made coffee and my hands shook for a while warming up, and she didn't say anything about that either. She was my wife by then, in all the ways that the word means. But I still didn't know her name. April brought it. I was in town for feed, and I came out of the dry goods to find Will Purdy leaning on the side of my wagon like he'd been waiting. "Got a minute, Cal?" I had a minute. We walked to his office. He closed the door, which Will Purdy never did on account of his build and the smallness of the room. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and then I'm going to ask you something." I sat down. He opened a desk drawer and put a paper on the desk between us. A flyer, printed in Salina, Kansas, dated 14 months ago, a hand-drawn likeness and a name underneath, Eleanor Marsh. Gone missing from the home of James Beaumont, her legal guardian upon the death of her parents. Information sought. A reward from her brother, Robert Marsh, currently serving as deputy sheriff of Reno County. The likeness was close enough. "You understand I don't make this your problem," Will said. "I make it your information." I looked at the paper a long time. "What are you going to do?" I said. "I wrote Robert Marsh 2 weeks ago," he said. "Got a reply yesterday, he's coming." "When?" "Week, maybe 10 days. I picked up my feed and drove home. She was splitting wood beside the house when I came up the track. She was good at it. She had a good, even swing, and she set her feet right and never fought the axe. I watched her for a moment before she heard the wagon. I put the wagon up and I came and I stood. "Tell me your name," I said. She held the maul loose at her side. She looked at me, one long moment. "Eleanor Marsh," she said. I nodded. "Your brother's a lawman in Kansas," I said. She didn't move. "Will Purdy wrote him," I said. "He's coming." Something crossed her face, not fear exactly, something heavier and older than fear. "I'll go," she said. "I'll be gone before he gets here. I'm sorry, Cal. I'm sorry for the false name and—" "I didn't ask you to go anywhere," I said. She stopped. "I asked you to tell me your name," I said. "You told me, now I know it. I'm going to put the team up." I walked to the barn. I slept on what I'd been told that night. Not because I was angry. I wasn't particularly. I was trying to understand the shape of it, and to do that I had to understand what I knew about the woman and what I still didn't. What I knew, she'd come here under a false name. She was hiding from something connected to a man named James Beaumont, who had been her guardian. She'd been gone 14 months before she showed up in the Abilene arrangement. Her brother was a lawman and had been looking for her. She was afraid of something, but the kind of afraid that makes a person careful and deliberate, not the kind that makes them collapse. What I didn't know, why she'd run. I thought about Beaumont's name on the flyer. Legal guardian, parents dead. I thought about the way she'd said I'll go like it was something she'd said before, to herself, in the dark. Like a decision already made and kept in reserve. I got up around 3 and went out to the porch and sat with the cold and looked at the plain. It was a clear night, and the stars were hard and the wind was flat, and I could see a long way to nothing. I'd lived a quiet life. I wasn't a man people noticed. My father had been the same way. We worked, we paid our debts, we didn't put ourselves in the way of other people's business. I had never been in a fight that wasn't purely necessary, and I had walked away from more than one trouble by not being where trouble was. I thought, you can keep doing that. I thought, the man who ran the boarding situation where she'd come from, the legal guardian. You don't need to know any more than the word guardian used for a grown woman, and the way she said I'll go to know enough. By the time the sky went gray, I knew what I was going to do. I told her in the morning. I told her I wasn't sending her anywhere, and if her brother came and he was a decent man, then we'd have a conversation, and she could decide what she wanted from it. And if this Beaumont had any claim he thought he could push, he was going to find that she was a married woman with a husband and a homestead in Harlan County, Nebraska, and that claim was going to dissolve in the wind. She stood in the kitchen and listened to all of this. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said. "That's generally true of most things," I said. "Doesn't seem like a reason to stop." "Beaumont has money," she said. "He's connected in Kansas and he'll push." "Let him push," I said. "He can push at me, I'm here." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she said. I thought about how to answer that. "Because you're my wife," I said. "And because you went out in 20 below weather with me to save cattle that weren't your cattle to save, and you didn't make a word of it, and that tells me who you are more than any name on a paper." She turned and looked out the kitchen window for a time. When she turned back, her face was plain and steady, and she said, "His name is Robert. He's not a bad man. He just didn't know what was happening in that house. I tried to tell him, and it was easier to run. Then when he gets here," I said, "you'll be in the room, and if you want to talk to him, we'll talk to him, and if you don't, he can talk to me." Robert Marsh arrived on a Friday. He was younger than I expected, maybe 32, 33. He had her eyes, which I recognized first. He rode a good horse, and he wore his badge, and he was polite with his hands away from his gun when he came up the track. I met him in the yard. I introduced myself and told him straight that Alina was my wife, married legal in Harlan County 3 months prior, and that she was here and safe and would speak to him if she chose. He took that in. He didn't bristle, I'll give him that. "I just want to know she's all right," he said. "She'll tell you herself," I said. She came out then. She'd been at the door. She walked out across the yard, her arms at her sides, and she stopped 10 feet from him, and they looked at each other a long time. "Ellie," he said, "it came out raw." "Robert," she said. What passed between them in the next hour on my porch was theirs, and I won't put it here except to say that she told him enough, and he listened without arguing, and at one point his jaw got very tight and he said Beaumont's name like a man biting through something. He asked her twice if she was safe here. She looked at me both times. "Yes," she said. "He stayed for supper. We talked about cattle and about the county and about his work in Kansas, and he was a straight-dealing man, and he didn't pretend the meal was comfortable, but he ate it honestly. When he went to ride out, he stopped in the yard and he looked at me. 'I owe you,' he said. 'No,' I said, 'you don't. She doesn't owe me either. We're square.' He put his hand out and I shook it. He rode south and I watched him until he was a small thing, and then nothing. I want to tell you what the next season felt like, because I think it's the part that matters, and it's the part that's hardest to say right. It wasn't that she was grateful. I didn't want gratitude, which is a currency that wears out fast and leaves both people feeling odd. What happened was something different. She stopped holding herself at a certain kind of angle, not that she'd been cold, she hadn't been. But there is a thing a person does when they're not sure if they're staying, a small economy of the self, keeping some part held back. That went out of her, gradually, like a muscle releasing. I noticed it first in October when we were restringing the south fence, the two of us out there with the wire and the staples in a dry, blowing afternoon. She started talking. Not about anything consequential, about a mare she'd had as a girl, a particular color, a habit the horse had of testing gate latches. I let her talk. She talked for near an hour and a half on and off, and I didn't say much, and she didn't seem to need me to. After a while she said, "I haven't talked about that horse since I was 16. I said, "She sounds like she was a good horse." And Alina laughed, that real private laugh out there in the dry wind with the grass flat and brown and the fence wire humming. And I thought, there it is. The business with Beaumont came to find us anyway, which I knew it would. January. A man came to the ranch who said he was a solicitor from Salina, and he had documents concerning the estate of Alina Marsh's parents and her status as ward of one James Beaumont, who he said had not consented to the marriage and had a legal interest in. I heard him out. I let him say all of it. Then I took him inside and showed him the marriage certificate, the homestead deed in both our names as I'd had drawn up in the fall, and a letter from Robert Marsh as deputy sheriff of Reno County, stating that his sister was married and settled, and he had visited her and found her in good health and of clear mind, and wanted no further contact from James Beaumont on any matter relating to his family. The solicitor's legal interest evaporated, the way things do when they don't have anywhere left to stand. After the man left, Alina came and stood in the doorway of the front room where I'd spread the papers on the table. She looked at them. "You had this ready," she said. "Since November," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "You never told me," she said. "Didn't seem necessary to worry you until it was necessary." She came into the room and she sat down across from me at the table. She put her hands flat on the table, which was a thing she did when she was going to say something plain. "Cal," she said, "I need you to know something." "All right." "When I took that stage," she said, "when I signed that arrangement paper, I was looking for a place to land. I didn't think I was looking for this." She gestured at the room at the window at outside, at the ranch, at whatever she meant by this. But I am here, she said. I want to be here, I'm not saying it from owing you. I'm saying it because it's true and you should know it's true. I looked at her across the table. I know it, I said. She held my eyes for a moment and I held hers. Then she nodded once, the way she had in the wagon on that first trip out, checking things off a ledger. But this was a different ledger. She got up and went back to what she'd been doing. There's a thing about this county in late spring that I've never been able to describe right to someone who hasn't stood in it. The grass comes in early and the light is low and long in the evening, and it sits on the plains so flat and deep it feels like it's coming up from inside the ground. Everything smells green and raw, and the wind has lost its winter edge and turns warm from the south. The cattle spread out and work the grass, and you can hear them from the house. I was on the porch one such evening in May, second year by then. The work had been good, the winter losses small, the money steadier than it had been in years, partly because Alina had found us a better deal on the Omaha contract and negotiated it herself, which still made me want to laugh a little when I thought about the solicitor who'd come for her. He hadn't known what he was up against. She came out and sat on the step below me, not the chair beside me, the step below leaning back slightly, which was how she sat in the evenings. She said, Gus Tolliver says you went by while I was in town Tuesday. Gus ran the neighboring section. I did, I said. That fence line needs work. He said you fixed 3 posts that were his to fix, she said. Seemed easier than waiting, I said. She was quiet for a moment. He also said, she said, that his wife thinks very highly of you. Clara Tolliver thinks highly of everyone, I said. She's got a large capacity for it. She said, Alina stopped and started over. I'm going to just say it. She said you were the finest neighbor in the county and the best thing to happen to me, and she wanted me to know that in case I didn't. I didn't say anything. I thought it was a funny thing to tell me, Alina said. Like maybe I didn't know. Do you? I said. She tipped her head back and looked up at me. From where she sat, I was above her, and the evening light was in her face, and her eyes were steady and direct. Yes, she said, I know. She turned back to look at the plain. The cattle were moving slow in the distance. The light was going gold. Her shoulder was against my leg, and after a moment I put my hand on her shoulder and she reached up and held my hand there, both our hands on her shoulder, and we sat like that while the light ran out. I'm going to tell you one more thing, and then I'm done. The following spring, Robert Marsh came back, not on official business. He wrote first and asked if he was welcome, which I thought showed good sense, and I wrote back and said come. He came in April, and we worked together for 3 days repairing the winter damage to the barn, and he was good with his hands and didn't need telling twice how to do something. On the last evening, he and Alina sat outside after supper. I went in to tend to something in the kitchen, and I could hear them talking low, and I didn't try to hear the words. It wasn't my conversation. When I came back out, he was telling her something about the town where they'd grown up, some particular person they'd known, and she was laughing. Really laughing. And he was smiling at her laughing the way a brother does, a little helpless, like he couldn't help smiling at it. He looked up and saw me, and his face did something quiet. He nodded once. I sat down, and the 3 of us sat in the last of the light, and he told the rest of the story about the person from the town. And Alina interrupted him twice to correct the details, and he argued both times and was wrong both times, and the evening settled down around us easy and slow. When Robert left the next morning, he shook my hand again. He held it a beat longer than a handshake needs. He rode south. I stood and watched him go the same way I had the first time until there was nothing. Alina came and stood beside me. Neither of us said anything. The morning was quiet and wide, and the grass was already green, and the light was coming straight across the flat land from the east. A good light. The kind that shows you things plainly. She was standing close enough that her arm was against mine. I've thought about that moment a good number of times since, the feeling of it. The ranch I'd built, the work that held. A woman beside me who knew exactly where she was standing and had chosen it clear-eyed without obligation and stayed. That's enough for a man. That is, if you want to know everything.